You ready, Greg?
I'm ready. Yep. Can everybody hear me?
Cool.
Um,
Yeah, you'll come
what
to
I'll
nice
do
and
is
loud.
I'll actually mute other people, I think, and if you could just go through the chat, that would be great.
No dramas. So everyone, just like to introduce Greg for his presentation on Introduction to Grading in the Gradebook, which I'm going to be paying really close attention to because it's something I need to learn as well. My understanding is Greg goes way back in the middle world, so hopefully he's got a lot of wisdom to share with us today. Take it away, Greg.
So if I can just very briefly introduce myself, obviously my name's Greg Egan. I'm an ex-high school teacher myself. I left that about 8 years ago, and now I work a lot with schools, supporting them mostly with e-learning in general, with Moodle as a particular focus, or learning management systems really as a particular focus. But most of my schools do use Moodle, which is great because it's been a favourite of mine for a long time. So what I find in working with the teachers is they don't often use the gradebook all that much. Quite often I feel like there's some misunderstanding, or they don't really get what's going on there, or they might see that there is something there but not understand exactly how it got there, or especially things like totals, course totals or category totals. They often don't really understand how those totals come about, and they can be misleading, I would think, and some of you may have or already had that experience yourself and seen totals that didn't make sense. Would that be the case? Could anyone, just using the chat window, could anyone give us any feedback as to whether you've looked at the gradebook and seen things that didn't look right or anything like that? Because it can definitely happen. In fact, I'd almost go as far, and I'd like to hear what Shane thinks about this. I'd go as far as to say it probably happens more than it doesn't when you first start. The course total is often quite confusing. So battle to tame the gradebook. Okay, well, hopefully we can at least give you some weapons in your battle, Dorothy. All right. So as I said, yeah, that's where I'm coming from. Ex-teacher, supporting other teachers in using e-learning tools with a particular focus on Moodle. I do a little bit of work for some companies as well, where I have helped them set up gradebooks in ways that they want. But it's really mostly with the schools, the high school teachers, and so forth. So let's get into it. All right. So the gradebook to me is something that's really powerful in helping you to track student progress in the ways that you want to do it. Thanks for that comment, Shane, also. So what I'm looking to do is introduce people to different ways that they can keep track of student progress using grading in the gradebook. So I'm going to look at the grader report, which is really the main, what I think of as the gradebook. As well, we'll look at the user report, which is almost a simplified version where you can look at just one student at a time, or you can look at all of them at once, but one at a time. I'll make it clear what I mean by that a little bit later. Also looking at how we can categorize the grades. So you might want to find totals for your grades for a particular topic, or maybe you want to see how students go in assignments versus quizzes or something like that. And we can set up grade categories and make them aggregate the grades that we want in those ways. I want to show you as well today, for those who haven't done it before, how we can set up scales. So when you first get a clean copy of Moodle, there's not much there in terms of scales. It's really, you can grade numerically and not a lot else there. I think there might be the connected ways of knowing scales, something like that. But I tend to set up things like A+ to E- is very popular around here at least, and also for the vocational education we set up scales for unsatisfactory and satisfactory, and also competent, not yet competent, things like that, so that we can grade the ways that we want. I want to look at how we aggregate grades, and that could be a topic of this whole talk and probably a lot more as well. But if you have no idea about it at all, it can seem like it's a bit of black magic how to grade aggregates to come up with. So hopefully I'll be able to at least clarify some of that for you. I want to also introduce letter grades, and they can seem at first very similar to scales, but they're not quite the same thing, even though they might produce the same looking result sometimes. Like if you're using an A+ to E- scale, you might also be displaying letter grades in some parts of your gradebook with A+ to E-, and they'll look the same, but they're really not quite the same thing, and hopefully I'll shed some light on that. The other thing I wanted to touch on today was setting a grade to pass. Now, for a long time I never really looked at that, but I found it really useful in terms of when I started to set up activity completion. So setting up a course where it would automatically tick off students as having completed particular activities when they have done them and received a grade, but I didn't want it to tick them off when they were getting an E or a D only. Say, for example, a C, a B, or an A would say that they had passed and therefore completed that activity. Before I go on, can I just check that everyone is hearing what I'm saying and understands where we're going with this? Could you just pop that in the chat window so I know that I'm not talking to myself? All right, fantastic. Thanks for that. All right, so these are the sorts of things that I wanted to touch on today. So moving ahead. Right. First of all, the user report. Now I've just used a screenshot here, but I'll go to a live one in a minute. So the user report, I've started with this before the grader report just because it's a simpler version of the gradebook because you're looking at only one student at a time. Now I've put a really simple one in here as the screenshot. As you can see, there are several assessment pieces and there are grades if that's been graded yet. All right. And if not, then there's nothing there. And there's normally a course total there as well. All right. It doesn't have to be. You can switch that off, and sometimes it might be a good idea to switch it off. If it's coming up with totals and you don't understand those totals, and in fact the totals are wrong, then it might be an idea to switch them off until you can get that under control. All right. So what I'm going to do is turn on my desktop sharing and move to somewhere where we can have a look at some grades. So I'll just go to that other window, get that where it should be, and turn on my desktop sharing. Okay, so it's telling me that the desktop sharing is working. So I'm just going to pop over for a second to my other window where I'm going to spend a bit of time. So I just want you to be able to see, and just let me know, because I won't be able to see my preview while I'm in the other window. But if you can just pop in there that you can see my Moodle science course, my dummy science course that I'm about to show you. So I've got a Year 8 chemistry course here that it's just a sample one that I've made up. So I'd just like to see that you are able to see that. All right, thanks guys. And within that course, I'm going to start to have a look at the Gradebook. So if you've never been there before, in your administration block under course administration, you'll find a link to grades. Now, that's there for a teacher. It's also there for students. Of course, students only see their own grades, and they may not even see them if you've made a decision in your course settings. But but by default I'm pretty sure they'll actually see their grades, but only theirs. So I'm going to click on grades and go into my gradebook. So the first thing I see when I go into my gradebook is the grader report itself. Okay, so that's the full gradebook. Now I've kept this one fairly simple. As you add more and more assessment pieces, of course it's going to get longer and be a little bit more complex than this, but I've got myself and 4 students, all of the student family by the looks, and everyone's enrolled in the course and they've been graded on certain things. So that's what my grader report looks like. I'm just going to flick over to the user report now, and for those who haven't spent any time in the gradebook, yours may have tabs, like the blue tabs that I'm looking at now, or it may have a drop-down menu, or it may have both like mine has got, depending on decisions made at the admin level. So you can go to the user report through here or through the tab. So I'm just going to go to the user report. While that's opening up, I'm just going to pop back into my big blue button and just check the chat for any questions if anyone's not seeing what I'm saying or not understanding what I'm saying. Alright, it's all good, so I'll go back into the user report and just have a little look at that one. Now, I've got myself showing here, but I could show what all users. Remember when I said you could see one user, or you could see all users but one at a time? That's where I choose all users. And I can see each user but individually rather than together as we see them in the grader report. I'll just go back to 1. As I said, this student's got a D and a B. The course total is showing 50. That's a percentage. It doesn't have to be a percentage. Right? We can show that as, for example, a letter. And D and a B basically averages out to a C, which is like 50%. Okay, the periodic table quiz hasn't been done and is being ignored. Right, whereas if I go to myself, because I think I've done that quiz, so I should have something for everything. It's an interesting total I'm getting now, and this is quite deliberate. I want to show you that you can get some unusual totals. So the periodic table quiz, I've got 100% in that, and in my assignments I've done very poorly. I've got an E minus, or I've got a D plus, which isn't as bad, but it seems unusual that I would have 82% as my course total, and that's what I was alluding to earlier on when I said that the totals can be misleading, and a little bit of a change in the setup can change that. So I'd just like you to pop into the chat window if either you have a question at this stage or if you understand what I'm talking about when I say that those totals can be misleading, and I'm leading into what we can do about that. Thanks, Dorothy. Yes, I am about to explain that, I hope. All right, thanks, guys. All right, I'm going to pop back into there. Now, the issue that I've got here is how that grade is being ascertained or aggregated. All right, by default, it uses something called a simple weighted mean method. All right, now, I'm sure you've heard the term mean before, which means well, it means a number of things, of course, but in maths it means what most people think of as an average. If you add up all of your items and divide them by the number of items, that's an average or a mean. Okay, there's lots of different kinds of averages, but mean is probably the most common one. But when you come to a simple weighted mean, it can come up with some different things. Okay, what's happening here is this quiz is actually out of 100, and it's getting a weighting of 100 because of that. Now, I'm using scales on these assignments. I've got E minus to A plus. Now, many of you will recognise that's a 15-point scale. In a simple weighted mean, that's giving it a weighting of 15. So the quiz is worth a lot more than the assignment, or either of these two assignments. So because I've got 100% on the quiz, that's far outweighing what I'm getting on the assignments, and that's why I've got such a high course total. Can you just let me know if what I'm saying makes sense? I'm going to show you how to change that in a moment, but I want to know that you understand how that total is coming to such a high number. Thanks, Meg. Lots of people do. Thanks, Dorothy. Okay, I'm going back into this now. Oh, thanks, Narissa. And I'm going to make this course total show something different and, to my mind, probably more realistic. So I'm going into categories and items now. Right now, these are the categories. In fact, the only category I have at the moment is the overall category for science. I haven't created any subcategories yet. These are my items. Now, the thing that's happening here is we're using a simple weighted mean of grades, and that's causing what I call an issue. So I'm going to click on the drop down here and change that. You can see there's lots of different ways that it can work, but the most common way I would work would be the mean of grades rather than the simple weighted mean. So that means each of those items is going to get the same weighting, but rather than this getting 100 and these two getting 15 each. Right, I'm going to save my changes. And go back to my user report. I'm just popping back to Big Blue Button. Was there a question? Okay, Dorothy, this is where you give up and do some. Let's just see if this helps at least. Okay, now in my user report, instead of getting 82%, they've now got 45%, which seems more realistic when you've got an E- and a D+ in it. So does that make sense to you? I've changed it. Instead of using a simple weighted mean, I'm using just a mean. That is, we're taking an average of these three things. So the 100% basically is the equivalent of an A+. All right. The E-, well, that's really, in numeric terms, the equivalent of a 0. And the D+, I'd have to have a look, but I think that's like about 45%. And in fact, we end up with 45% as the course total. I want to ask you, does that seem more realistic? And do you see how I did it? Thanks, Dorothy. Narissa, you don't have to set weightings for each assessment. No, you can. To me, it doesn't always have to be, always have to set a weighting. In fact, generally, where I work or where I taught in, I'm not sure where you guys are from, I'm from Queensland, Australia, we tend to look at each assessment piece as being equally weighted. It's not always the case, but very commonly it is. They all have set weightings. Okay, that's interesting. I haven't actually put that into this this session, but you can set weightings. Well, I have put it in my I put it into my slideshow presentation, so hopefully that will help clear that one up. Okay, Narissa, I'm just going to take you off mute, actually, Narissa, if you could just explain a little bit further. What I think you're saying is that, that each assessment piece has a prescribed weighting, like one of them will be 20%, one of them will be 30%, or something like that. I'm just going to take you off mute now, Narissa, if you'd like to explain a bit further.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. Can everyone hear Narissa? Everyone else is muted. So yeah, thank you, guys.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So our courses, when they are, I work at a polytechnic. I guess that's like a TAFE.
Yes.
when they're approved, they go to the New Zealand Qualifications Authority for approval. So there's a qualification document, and for each course there will be a course descriptor saying what the learning outcomes and aim of the course are. And then within that course descriptor, it will specify how many assessments, what learning outcomes the assessments are covering, and the weighting of those assessments. So assessment one might be an assignment that's worth 10% and covers learning outcome 1. So the tutor has to make sure that the assessment that they give out meets that criteria. So they can't kind of pick and choose.
Okay. Yeah, all right. So that's kind of what I thought you meant. And as I said, I'm not sure that we've got enough time to cover everything I've prepared and go right into that, but I have actually got it on one of these slides how you can do that. So when we get to that, I'll just see if that seems clear to you.
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay, so the one I've just done really, by using a mean rather than a weighted mean, I've changed it so that they're all considered equal, but you can go a little bit further than that in a couple of ways. All right, so the user report, as I said, I just started with the user report because it's a simpler view than the grader report. Now, even the grader report, I've tried to keep my example to only a few items and a few students to keep it fairly simple. I'm just going to go across to my next slide. All right, so the grader report, as you can see, it says the grader report is in the main gradebook. And we get there under the course administration, click grades, and you go straight to the grader report. Otherwise, you can choose it from your drop-downs or your tabs. Okay, so this is what a grader report might look like. I'll go back and go into mine. Okay, so grader report showing all students and all assessment items. Now, I'll just go to my next slide as well. All right, so what we can do is you can look at, as these things get more complicated, you can look at just one student's grades. Now, as you know, when you get a large table full of information, it can be difficult to look across and make sure you're looking at the right things. And one of the nice things about the grader report is if I click in the blank space in the cell where a student's name is, it will select all of the grades for that student for me. So if I want to see this student and say Steve's student as well, right, I can look at just those two, and to turn off that highlighting, click again in that area. Right. Similarly, if I want to look at all of the grades in one column, I can click on that column in a blank area near the assessment piece name, and then click again to get out of that one. Okay, and another thing that is handy in the grader report is that you can rank them. You can say, all right, for the assignment, who did the best to the worst in the assignment? So I can click on the little sort button, right? And now I've got it sorted from A to E minus. If I click it again, I can go the other way. Okay, so these are handy little things, I think, to help you work with the grader report. Okay, next thing that I would look at is probably creating grade categories. So as you saw, I have quiz and a couple of assignments. So one of the ways I could do this is set up a category for quizzes and a category for assignments, just so that I can get totals and see how students, the whole class or particular students, go on quizzes versus assignments, because that might change the way I need to teach or the way I need to assess. Just having that knowledge is really quite powerful. Another way I can do it is set up categories for particular topics or units and say, all right, in this topic we have a few assessment pieces. I want to see how they go on that one before we go on to the next topic, and I'll get a total for the next topic as well. And there's lots of ways you can use this. just as another example, if you're doing vet courses or I'm not sure what people call everything I'm talking about, or vocational education and training courses that have satisfactory and unsatisfactory and competent, not yet competent, you can set up categories for each of your units of competency as an example. And on each assessment piece, you can have satisfactory, unsatisfactory, leading to whether they get a competent or not yet competent in terms of that whole unit of competency. Does what I'm saying now make sense or not? Because I'm really not sure if it's the same for if you use the same language for your vocational training courses. Okay, thanks, Dorothy. If you are doing the vocational education and training courses, then you would need to set up some custom scales. I'm going to go through that shortly anyway. I normally set up satisfactory and unsatisfactory. That's the way we do it here at the moment. Things do change a little bit with the vocational education, but we do satisfactory and unsatisfactory, which lead into competencies, whereas years ago we used to do everything as competent or not yet competent. But now each individual thing is satisfactory, unsatisfactory, until you're actually awarding a competency. Okay, so setting up grade categories. All right, I've got some instructions here on how you do it. So you would go to the gradebook and go to categories and items. I've said go to simple view, but just go straight to categories and items, and you'll be able to add a category, as I've said there. So if I get up to my gradebook and into categories and items, I'm going to set mine up the way I said first, which is I'm going to set it up a category for quizzes and a category for assignments. I'll click on Add Category. Notice that because I've set up my whole course for mean of grades, it's inherited that here. I've got mean of grades rather than simple weighted mean of grades, which is good because that's what I want. All right, so I'm going to call this one quizzes. Save changes. I might have to come back and configure that a little bit further in a moment. I just heard a beep. I wonder if there's a question there. Thanks to Marissa. Yeah, it's saying when you're using the terminology that's common around wherever you are, and when you speak to people from elsewhere, you've got to be a little bit careful with it, of course. Okay, so I've got a category for quizzes. I'm adding another one for assignments. Checking whether those are questions coming through. No, lots of lols and funny ones. And fair call. All right, so you'll be able to see now that I have a new category for quizzes and for assignments, but they're fairly useless right now because there's nothing in them. So what we need to do is move some of the assessment pieces into these categories. And there's a couple of ways you can do this. The way I normally do it is the little move button over here. If I click on that one, I can move the periodic table quizzes that is, into quizzes category. Right, now I can see the periodic table quiz is in the quizzes category, and I'll do the same thing for the assignments. Assignment 2 as well. Okay, so my overall or overarching category is science. But Then I've got a category within that for quizzes, another one for assignments, and everything is in their right place. Now, I don't think I'm quite finished yet, but let's have a look at the view to go back to the grader report. Okay, so I've got quiz is showing within the quizzes category in the grader report, assignments similarly in the assignments category. Just have a look at the user report as well. Okay, so in the user report, you'll see a category for quizzes and another one for assignments. Biggest issue I have now is that I've got a scale, that is the A plus to E minus scale, adding into a number, which isn't quite what I want. I'll just check whether that was a question. Now, the way I do it is I keep the mean, but it is very flexible, and there are other ways you can do it, and we'll have a quick look at the weighted means in a moment as well. But yes, I would leave it like that. Right, so I'd just like to show you at least how we can make the assignments show a category total of a scale rather than a number. So I'd expect that would be E minus D plus. They would be around D minus, I guess. D minus E plus. So let's see if we can make it show the way it should. And there's actually probably two ways you can do this. You could show us a letter grade, or I think it would actually be better to show it as a scale. All right, and hopefully by the end of this, you understand the difference between the two. You can see there are two different items on the tabs. But what I'm going to do is go into categories and items. I'll have to work on my answers. Okay, so I'm going into categories and items. And what I want to work on is the total for assignments. All right. Now, it can be confusing at first whether you go to the category total and work on it there. And you can. It's just probably if you need something a bit more complex, you do it there. But if you go to the assignments heading and click on Edit Assignments, all right, I'm going to go into the category total. That's what I'm interested in. I'm going to change the graded type to a scale. When you do that, you have to choose the scale. So these are scales that, well, most of these are ones I've added in at some time. The one I'm using at the moment is A plus to E minus. I'll just check the grade display type. I probably don't have to change this, but I'll just click on Show More. Go to grade display type. All right, it's default. It's on its default, which is real. Just means it's going to show exactly what is there, and therefore it will be the A plus to E minus one. Now, I only really went to that because there is another way of doing it, and that's to show the letter grades. But unless we configure that very carefully, we'd actually end up with a different result. So that changed, telling it to use a scale has said, all right, that's showing a D minus now, which is what you'd expect with the E minus and the D plus. So just over to you quickly, does that make sense? Do you want me to quickly show you it again? Or to me, that's quite important to be able to get it showing the category totals exactly the way you want them to. So just waiting for some comments as to whether that's clear, or would you like me to go over it again? Okay, great. Good tutu with it. That might be a language. Oh, okay. That's not what I was thinking, Marissa. That's right, Meg. To get your head around it and get it set up properly to start is that's fine, Marissa. Is the way to go. I will just quickly show you how you can also hide it. Like quite often when teachers are getting into this, I often find, I don't know, but I think some of you have used Moodle for a while, but you may not have used the Gradebook before. But in with the teachers I support, quite often they're only just dipping their toe in the water in lots of things, and getting their head around the Gradebook is always top priority for them. So, Dorothy, if you are not the only person that's sort of interrupt myself, I think lots and lots of people made that exact mistake, Dorothy, and I certainly made it myself a few years ago, setting up your scale as A+ to E- when it really needs to be E- to A+. The Gradebook sort of works it all out backwards if you do it that, particularly if it's if you've got some different scales and it's trying to aggregate them all together. So yeah, don't feel that you're at all Robinson Crusoe on that one, Dorothy. Okay, so I was just going to show you how you can hide some totals as well. So let's say course total of 60.71% wasn't right, and as I said before, quite often will not be right, especially once you start mixing up numbers and scales. Like you might have a quiz which is a number, and it could be, by default, they're normally numbers out of 10, I think, but I've made this 100 really just to make a point, to give it a high weighting. When you get numbers against scales, unless you understand exactly how it's being worked out, the totals won't really make sense. So until you get your head around it, you turn them off and say, I don't want to see a total. And to do that, you would just go into categories and items. Right, and any of these things can be hidden: category totals and course totals. So I'm just going to hide the course total now. Right, course total is hidden. So to my view, I can see category totals but no course total now. So if you've got a total that you don't know what it's doing, and until you do know what it's doing, it's probably better you're not showing the students. That's my view anyway, because you know, they're just going to be asking, well, what's that total? You know, why have I got an E- when I shouldn't, or why have I got an A? Well, if they've got an A+ and they shouldn't, they might stay a bit quieter. But you know what I mean? They could it could be confusing for students and possibly parents if they're seeing it as well. So probably hide it until you know what it's doing. Just going over to see what the comments are there. That's interesting, Dorothy. I have to admit I've never really looked at removing that one. I'll go and have a look. And see Shane's in there. If I don't find it and you do know the answer, Shane, feel free to jump in on that one. Oh, Shane, I was just saying, well, you can see Dorothy's question there, and I've never looked at deleting the range column. Not sure if you can or not. So I was just wondering if you did know off the top of your head about that one. But yeah, feel free to chime in. If you don't, or if you know you can't, then that would be fine too. But it doesn't seem that it's as simple as the other ones where you can just hide them. An admin setting. Okay. otherwise, I'm happy to do some digging around, and if we haven't got an answer for that, Dorothy, feel free to email me and I'll have a look around for that one for you. Okay, but to me, one of the biggest ones is just making sure the things that do that are showing do make sense. If they don't make sense to you, then they're probably not going to make sense to the students. And it's just just probably trouble you don't need at the start when you're just first getting your head around this sort of stuff. Okay, so we've added grade categories and we've changed how they aggregate. Now, I'm not certain whether, we're going to go through a lot of things here. I'm not certain whether you're going to remember that, but I'd like to think that you at least understood it as we went through. Remember, the recording will be available for this, and also my my slide deck there. So hopefully that will be enough for you. Can I just get some feedback as to whether you got everything that we did there, creating the categories and changing how they aggregate? All right, fantastic. Thanks, guys. I'll keep moving then. All right. All right, so actually I've done this slide, moving items into categories, so I'll move past that. I've got a bit of an eye on the time as well. Custom scales, all right. Well, thanks, Shane. Dorothy, does sound right, Shane. Dorothy, if you can just take note of that one. Okay, sorry, Meg, was that in relation to the custom scales, or are we still talking about the previous question? Both, okay. Right, well, with an eye on the clock, I'll definitely move on to custom scales. If people have already done this and know how to do custom scales, could you just let me know one way or the other, because I'll know how much time to spend on it? So what I'm talking about is, as it says on the slide there, creating scales for A+, E-. Okay, want to see custom scales? Fantastic. Let's go ahead and create some custom scales. All right. Now, I would just be going into my gradebook as normal. Welcome back to see more of those comments. All right. I'll be going into my gradebook as normal and going to scales. Now, you can do this from a site administration point of view as well. So I am logged in as the administrator of my site here, but I'm doing it as if I were a teacher at the moment. Now, you can see all of these scales that I've got here are standard scales. All right, so I have created them as an administrator, and I've made them standard scales. That means they're available throughout any course on this site. If I want to add a new scale, add a new scale, and then give it a name, whatever it may be. Now I'm running out of things to call scales because I've got quite a few in this site. I'm not sure what it'll do if I try to double up, so I'll give that a try anyway. A2E, I'm going to call this. Oh, okay, yep. Was the question about what are scales? I see Meg saying bands. So a scale is what you're grading against. So it would be, in some cases it could be numerical. In Queensland here, we don't really do very much numerical. We do mainly A+ to E- as a scale, and also satisfactory, unsatisfactory. There's probably some other ones out there as well, but they're certainly the most common ones. So I'm just going to do an A to E scale here because it's nice and quick to do. As an administrator, if I tick standard scale, this will become available to all courses within the site. A teacher would not have that option, only an administrator. So I'm going to create the scale, and this is what Dorothy alluded to earlier, that is creating it the wrong way around. If I start at E, it's the wrong way around. Oh, sorry, if I start at A, it's the wrong way around. Okay, that will be backwards, and the only thing it will affect will be the aggregation. And if you're using aggregation, that is, you're using course totals and category totals, then that will lead it astray, particularly when it starts comparing one scale with another. Like I was saying before, you might have an assignment and a quiz. The quiz is a numeric scale and you don't have to set it up, so it's already going the right way. If your assignment scale that you're grading against is going the wrong way, then you're going to get some confusing results. So I'm going to say E, D, C, B, A. If you like, you can put a description in. I won't bother for this one. So I'm going to save changes. Alright, so that's a custom scale. Because I didn't make it a standard scale, it shows up there, and that's where scales will come up that are created by teachers. So teachers can normally create scales within their classes, but only administrators can create standard scales that are available to everybody. And in, I guess, most organisations, they would use the same scales in most of their courses, if not all of their courses. So probably making them standard is a good thing, so that every teacher doesn't have to go in and make their own, but you do need the administrator privilege to be able to do that. Okay, so does that make sense about creating the scales? We haven't used it yet, but we've at least created it. Yep. And Dorothy, that was what you were talking about before, was it, with the creating it backwards? All right, thank you. Now, if I was going to use that scale, I'd go and create an assessment piece, or go to one that I've already got and haven't yet graded against. So I'm just going to go back to my course page. Yep, the lowest or worst comes first, Dorothy. If I went to add an activity or resource, just keep it as an assignment. Won't go right into this. I'll just show you that it's available. So when I got down to grade, by default it's grading out of 100. I don't want to do that. But above there, I've got my A to E scale that I just created. Looks like I previously created one and called it E to A, but they'd be the same scales. That's only the name where it says E to A or A to E, rather than the actual scale itself. In both cases, I would have created those starting with E, so in fact those two would be the same scales. Okay, so when I create an assignment, choose my scale, and then when I go to grade that assignment, that's the scale that will be available to grade the students on. All right, so once again, just checking with you guys, does that all make sense? Thank you. All right, thanks, Meg. And I'll keep moving. Again, eye on the time. We haven't got a great deal of time left, so I'll see what I can skip through, as in things that I think have already been covered. Using custom scales, well, I just showed you that. Grade aggregation. All right, I wanted to talk through this a bit and not necessarily show you everything. So grade aggregation just means how the grades are totaled, how the course totals are worked out, and it is very flexible and can be quite complex. Doesn't mean it has to be quite complex. It can be as complex as you need it to be. So for this introductory presentation, just examining the more simple level, that is the common aggregation methods. Right, so I'm going to skip through a little bit of this because I think I already explained the simple weighted mean. Right, well, I won't go through it again just for time purposes, but hopefully you got that the first time around. Otherwise, you can come back to the slide deck here. The next one, that's the one that I have used in my example. Right, I've said it's a mean of grades. All right, actually, I will go back to that previous slide just to reinforce something. I'm not sure if you can see this very well, but this Pam Appleton here has got 100% in one of her activities, and then it's pretty small, but I think that's an E, or it could even be an F in assignment 1, and yet she's got something like 96% over here. Now that total's set to percent, it could be set to something else, but obviously that's much higher than it should be. right? And that's the issue that I have with the simple weighted mean. I mean, there could be instances where it's just fine, but I just think when you first get into it, if you're mixing up your scales in particular, like numeric versus A to E or something like that, it's very easy to get in trouble with that one, or have it display the wrong thing. So in the mean of grades example here, I've changed that, and in fact, I think that's actually a C that I'm showing there. So 100 and a C, and the category total comes back to 50%, which if you're showing percents, that kind of makes sense. It's a little small there, but yeah, basically we can get a much better result. Now, there is the other one which people were asking about before, which is the weighted mean of grades. And I've put in a simple example here as well. Instead of, remember when I changed it from simple weighted mean to a mean of grades? Well, another option there is a weighted mean of grades. And in the example here, I've taken the elements drag and drop and given it its default weighting, which is 1. Right, so all the assessment pieces would have a default weighting of 1, but I've changed the assignment to a weighting of 3. Right, so the assignment's worth 3 times as much as the elements drag and drop activity. Okay, so what we find there is that when Pam Appleton, down the bottom here, gets an E for assignment 1, was an E, not a C. I think I said a C on the previous slide. Makes more sense now. The E plus her 100% here, she still only gets 25%. But that's what I wanted, because I'm saying that the assignment is much more important than the drag and drop activity. So I've given it 3 times the weight. All right, so an E is almost like getting 0. All right, it might even be an E minus there. I can't quite read it. But say you've got 0 for something that's worth 3 times the weight. Well, 3 times 0 is 0. And something that's worth only 1/4 of the total, 100% for that. And that's why she ends up with 25%. All right, so she gets a much lower mark because she's bombed out on the most important thing. Does that make sense? I'm just thinking, I don't think I've got time to go into go and actually show you setting all that up, but I hope it's quite clear from the slide. Shane, my preference is exactly the same, and I think changing it in the admin settings is a good idea. All right, so I'm going to continue because we're really coming up to time now. Thanks, Shane, for that. Site admin grades, grade category settings. Yeah, I see what you mean, Marissa. So we're not adding the weightings as a percent there. We're adding them as, as a total. If there's 4 parts, this one's worth 3 and this one's worth 1. Again, I'd have to have a look into doing that. The way I've always done it is with this. And again, Shane, if you know that it is possible to do it as a percent, I'm happy to have your input there. I'll keep moving though. Right. I just wanted to pop in something about outcomes as well. Does anyone is anyone using outcomes? I find outcomes really yeah, thanks Shane, that's what I thought too. I find outcomes really good because we work with in Queensland we work mainly with criteria-based assessment. So we don't normally give 1 grade for an assessment piece. We give grades on 2 or 3 or 4 criteria. Okay, so Dorothy, you gave it a go. All right. If you do use outcomes, then you need to be a little bit careful of making sure that the outcomes are included in your aggregation of your categories. So just having a look at this slide, I've set up a history course where I've set up and graded on outcomes for my 2 criteria. So this is from memory, the Australian National Curriculum. There are 2 criteria in, I think it was Year 9 history, probably all history. I'm not a history teacher, by the way. Historical knowledge and understanding and historical skills. So there are 2 criteria. So I have set up outcomes, as you can see there. That's a screenshot from that course. And if you're going to do that, then you've got to make sure that you include outcomes in your category aggregation. That is, if you want it to aggregate. And I can't see why you wouldn't really, because you can set up a category for each of those and include the actual assessment outcomes from each assessment piece in those categories, and it will aggregate it all for you. So it makes things a lot easier. It's the way we do it, at least in Queensland, is that we would look at everything that a student has got for each criteria first, and then we give them an overall grade. Now, with not a lot of trouble, you can get Moodle to work it out for you. Right? The teachers don't necessarily stick to it because there's a few other things involved. There's, in particular, there's a thing called fullest and latest information. All right, and the way that that's generally interpreted is if a student's gone really well or really badly towards the end of the course, that later information is given a higher weight than the earlier information. Okay, so if you've been getting C's all the way through, and then you get a few A's at the end, what you end up with will not be an exact average of those things that you've got all the way through a couple of years of the course. Right? It will be weighted more towards the A's at the end. But similarly, if you start getting E's at the end, all right, so they do use that later information. But my point here is that Moodle can do the aggregation. You don't have to stick to it, but at least it will give you a starting point, and it's not all that difficult to set up. And I've given you a little bit of information here. If you go to categories and items and edit the category that you, like for example, the historical skills category, make sure you click on the Show More link, and then there's a tick box there for including outcomes in the category. And once you do that, it will include your outcomes, and it might be that you've only got outcomes in that category. So outcomes are like what we call criteria. You can use them for other things as well, like competencies and so forth. All right. I want to talk a little bit about letter grades as well. I'm kind of going over time here, so I'll have to stop and give you a chance for some questions. But with letter grades, they look, when they're displayed, they look like scales, or the A+ to E- scale at least, but they are a little different. Right? They're really for display rather than, we don't grade using the letter grades. They are for display purposes in the gradebook. And to use them, we can go into the categories and items and click to edit a particular item, and by that I normally mean a category or the course total, and change its grade display type to letter. So I'll give you an example of that. I'll go and show you how I would do that. Okay, so I could go into, say, whole course, science course, the overarching category, and in the category total, go to Show More, and in the grade display type, I could say letter. Right, so it's going to show a letter based on what it's going to do is take the percentage that that one's come to, and it's going to check that against a table of letter grades and see what grade they should actually receive. So I'm going to save changes on that one. We'll go and have a look, see what it's going to show us. Oh, sorry, I forgot I hid that before, so I'm going to go and just show the total again. Course total, remember, was hidden, so I'll unhide that, show it. Alright, the course total is showing now, and it's a D. Now that's a letter as distinct from a scale. So I've told it to show letters, and where it gets the letters from. If you go up to letters up the top here, okay, this is the scale of letter grade, so I've got A as the top one, right, you've got an A plus up there, and you've got all percentages, which works out what letter they should have displayed. You can edit those as well. So if you go into edit grade letters, right, I'm going to override the site's defaults and start changing these things around. Alright, I won't take the time to do all of that now, but as you go through that, you can change all of those boundaries, save your changes, and that will make a difference to what's actually displayed there. Thanks very much, Shane. Thanks for your input as well. Okay, so to my last couple of slides, I've just shown you editing letter grades. That's the only other thing, and I'll just leave you this one you can check out from the slide yourself rather than to go and show you because I am over time. But grade to pass, to me, it's useful if you're using activity completion. Is anyone there using activity completion where either, well, not so much that students can tick off whether they've completed things, but doing it automatically. So when students get a grade for something, it ticks it off. All right. If you do set it up in that way, so set up your activity completion so that students get a tick next to something when they get a grade, you can also go into the gradebook and set a grade to pass for any activity. All right. I can't help myself. I'm going to show you. Just going into mine again, going into my categories and items. All right, for any of these items, I can set a grade to pass. So I'm going to go to one of my assignments, hit the edit button. I'm going to go to show more. All right, now being A plus 20 minus, this one's got a maximum of 15, a minimum of 1. I might say they need 8 to pass that. All right, if I do that, that will have an effect on my activity completion. So if I've set it up the way I told you a second ago, then they'll only get a tick if they get at least 8 out of 15, which I have to count on my fingers, check what that is in A plus 20 minus. So I think it's a C. It might be a C plus. No, I think it's actually a C. So if they get a C or better, it will say they've completed that assignment. If they don't, then it will remain unticked until they get that grade. Okay, so we've been going a million miles an hour, and I have finally covered everything that I had hoped to. So I guess I'm going to just open it up to other questions. I'm aware that having gone over time, we don't have a great deal of time for that because people will need to be available for other sessions as well. So if you've got another question, if it's outside the scope of what we're doing here, I'd be happy to have a look at something for you. But otherwise, I guess any feedback is really great to know how you went with all of this. Yes, you can ask questions in the forum. And what I'm going to do, thanks, Nerissa. I'm glad you enjoyed that. What I'm going to do, I've got just 2 more short activities to do in the Moodle course itself. They're hidden at the moment. I'm just going to get you to do that choice again, just to see if you moved up the scale at all. And I've got a little feedback exercise as well, which just involves 5 questions, from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And if you are able to do those, it'll only take you a minute, and I'd really appreciate the feedback. So thanks everyone for attending, and unless anyone's got anything else, I'll sign off now.
Thanks, Greg. I think we'll have to wrap it up there, but you've got the session feedback where so you send questions to Greg that way. I'm going to be bookmarking that course page for the record and coming back to it a few times, I think. Yeah, thank you very, very much. Much appreciated for your time, and hope to see you all in the next session.
Thanks, guys. I'll just go in and make those 2 activities available in the course. I really appreciate it. It'll only take you a minute or 2 to do. Thanks again.